The rain fell in sheets, a merciless silver veil that blurred the world into a watercolor of greens and grays. It plastered the tattered lace of the wedding dress to Alara Vance's skin, each cold drop a tiny, stinging reminder of her failure. The gown, a couture creation that had once represented a future of glittering certainty, was now a ruined flag of surrender, its hem shredded and stained with mud from the forest floor she had just stumbled through. She stood on the shoulder of a lonely country road, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the bone-deep terror of being utterly, terrifyingly alone. Every passing headlight was a potential threat, a pair of eyes belonging to the man she had just fled. Julian. The thought of his name was a cold stone in her stomach. A pair of those headlights slowed, the engine a low, comforting rumble that was different from the predatory purr of the luxury cars that populated her life. An old, deep blue pickup truck, weathered but sturdy, pulled over a few yards ahead. For a moment, she held her breath, heart hammering against her ribs. Was it one of his men? Had he found her already? The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out into the deluge, holding a large black umbrella. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit or the cruel, polished shoes of Julian's security team. He wore worn jeans, a thick flannel shirt, and work boots. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and as he approached, his steps were measured, unthreatening. "Mom." His voice was deep, calm, carrying easily over the drumming rain. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Alara flinched, pulling the torn remnants of her dress tighter around herself. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice a thin, reedy thing. The man stopped a respectful distance away, holding the umbrella so it shielded her a little from the worst of the downpour. He didn't press, didn't pry. He just looked at her with eyes that held a quiet, profound kindness she hadn't encountered in years. They were brown and steady, and they saw not a socialite in a ruined gown, but a human being in distress. "It's no night to be out in this," he said simply. "My house is just a couple of miles down the road. My daughter and I are about to have dinner. You'd be welcome to join us. Get warm. Use the phone." His daughter. The words disarmed her more effectively than any threat could have. A man with a daughter, speaking of dinner on a rainy night, seemed an entire world away from the cold, calculated universe of Julian Croft. Her carefully constructed walls, breached by exhaustion and fear, began to crumble. "I don't have any money," she whispered, the admission tasting like ash. It was the only language she knew now, the transactional nature of her existence. A small, gentle smile touched his lips. "I'm not asking for any. Marcus, by the way." He extended a hand, then seemed to think better of it, letting it fall back to his side. "Come on. You'll catch your death out here." She looked down the dark, empty road, then back at his honest, open face. She had been running from a gilded cage, a prison of wealth and expectation. Now, a stranger in a humble truck was offering a simple, unconditional sanctuary. It was a choice between a known monster and an unknown man. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Alara chose to trust. She nodded, a single jerky movement, and let him lead her toward the warm, dry promise of the truck. The rain, she noticed as she ducked inside, was already starting to feel a little less cold. The interior of the truck smelled of sawdust, coffee, and something faintly sweet, like crayons. It was the scent of a life lived, a stark contrast to the sterile, leather and polish aroma of Julian's fleet of vehicles. Alara huddled in the passenger seat, the truck's heater blasting warm air that slowly began to thaw her frozen limbs. She watched Marcus drive, his large hands gentle on the steering wheel. He didn't ask questions, didn't fill the silence with idle chatter. He simply drove, occasionally glancing over to ensure she was all right, his presence a quiet, reassuring anchor in the storm of her thoughts. They turned down a gravel driveway flanked by tall oak trees, pulling up to a small, single-story house. It was modest, with dark blue siding that matched the truck and a wide, welcoming front porch where a wooden swing sat motionless in the damp air. Light spilled from the windows, a warm, golden yellow that promised comfort within. This was not a house designed to impress. It was a house designed to be a home. "Here we are," Marcus said, turning off the engine. "It's not much, but it's dry." Inside, the warmth enveloped her. The house was even more lived in than the truck. A child's colorful drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A pair of small, muddy boots were kicked off by the door, and a half-finished puzzle was spread across the coffee table in the cozy living room. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, its light dancing on the wooden floors. It was a home filled with the quiet, beautiful clutter of love. A small girl with 2 long braids and Marcus's kind, serious eyes peeked out from behind a doorway. She clutched a well-loved stuffed rabbit, her gaze wide and curious. "Lily, this is a friend of mine," Marcus said gently, his voice softening as he spoke to her. "She was caught in the rain. Can you say hello?" The girl, Lily, didn't speak. She simply stared at Alara, her head tilted. Then, she walked slowly forward and held out a piece of paper. It was a drawing, rendered in bright, waxy crayon, of a smiling sun surrounded by a rainbow. Alara's throat tightened. In her world, gifts were investments, transactions wrapped in silk paper. This was something else entirely. It was a simple offering of welcome. "Thank you," Alara whispered, her voice cracking. She took the drawing with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful." Lily gave a small, shy smile before retreating to her father's side, burying her face in his leg. "She's a bit shy," Marcus explained quietly. "Why don't you get warmed up by the fire? I have some old clothes of my sister's that should fit you. I'll go get them." Left alone for a moment, Alara sank onto the hearth, the rough stone warm against her back. She looked from the crayon sun in her hand to the real fire in the grate, a profound sense of dislocation washing over her. Just hours ago, she had been standing in a cathedral, surrounded by hundreds of people, suffocating under the weight of 1,000 expectations. The flowers alone had cost more than this entire house was likely worth. Yet, here, in this humble living room, with a child's drawing in her hand, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't realized was missing: peace. Marcus returned with a soft, worn sweatshirt and a pair of gray sweatpants. "The bathroom is just down the hall," he said. "Dinner's almost ready. Just a simple shepherd's pie." In the small, clean bathroom, Alara peeled off the ruined dress. It clung to her like a second skin, a remnant of a life she no longer wanted. Leaving it in a sodden heap on the floor felt like shedding an identity. As she pulled on the soft, clean clothes, she looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was stripped of her armor. The designer labels, the perfect hair, the carefully applied makeup. All that was left was a pale, frightened woman with haunted eyes. And yet, for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she was looking at herself. When she returned to the living room, the table was set for 3. The aroma of baked food filled the air. Marcus gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Feeling better?" "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find it was the truth. "Thank you for everything. Everyone needs a little help sometimes," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "No need to thank me." They ate in a comfortable quiet, punctuated only by the clinking of forks and the crackling of the fire. Lily, sitting opposite Alara, ate her food meticulously, occasionally glancing up with a curious, unreadable expression. There were no demands, no expectations. It was just a meal shared. The simplicity of it was so foreign, so profound, that it brought tears to Alara's eyes. She blinked them back, determined not to break down, not to bring the chaos of her world crashing down on this peaceful one. But as Marcus passed her a basket of warm bread, his hand brushing hers, she knew it was already too late. Her world had already collided with his, and neither would ever be the same. Later that evening, after Lily had been tucked into bed, the house settled into a deep, peaceful quiet. The only sounds were the soft sighing of the fire and the gentle drumming of the rain, which had now softened to a whisper against the window panes. Alara sat on the sofa, wrapped in a thick quilt, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. Marcus sat in a worn armchair opposite her, nursing his own mug. He hadn't asked her a single question about who she was or why she was running. He had simply offered her shelter, a change of clothes, and a hot meal, his generosity as unconditional as it was startling. This quiet, this absence of interrogation, was what finally undid her. In Julian's world, every conversation was a negotiation, every silence a strategic maneuver. Information was leverage. Here silence was just peace. It was an invitation, not a demand. "He was going to own me," she heard herself say, the words spilling out into the quiet room before she could stop them. They sounded small and fragile. Marcus didn't jolt or lean forward eagerly. He simply looked at her, his expression patient, and waited for her to continue if she chose to. He gave her the space to find her own words. "My fiancé," she clarified, her voice gaining a little strength. "Julian, that's his name. The wedding, it wasn't a marriage. It was a merger. He's a billionaire, a collector of beautiful things. And I was to be his latest acquisition." She took a shaky sip of tea, the warmth spreading through her chest, giving her courage. "He didn't love me. I don't think he knows how. He values things. Companies, art, properties, people. He had our whole life mapped out. What I would wear, who my friends would be, which charities I would support. He even had a clause in the prenuptial agreement about maintaining a publicly presentable appearance. It was a business contract for my life." A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. "I went along with it for so long. I told myself it was security. I told myself it was what I was supposed to want. My father was a businessman who lost everything. He always told me the most important thing was to be secure, to never be vulnerable. And Julian, he's the opposite of vulnerable. He's a fortress." She looked up at Marcus, her eyes pleading for him to understand. But living in a fortress is just another kind of prison. Today, standing at the altar, looking at him, I didn't see a husband. I saw a warden. I saw the rest of my life, every day scripted, every choice made for me. I saw a beautiful golden cage, and I just couldn't. I couldn't step into it. So I ran. She finally finished, her breath catching in a sob she could no longer contain. The story, which had been a tangled, screaming mess in her head, felt simpler, truer, now that it was spoken aloud in this safe, quiet room. Marcus set his mug down on the side table and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. His gaze was full of an empathy so profound it felt like a physical comfort. "It takes a lot of courage to walk away from a life everyone tells you should want," he said, his voice low and steady. "It takes even more to run towards something you can't see yet." "I don't feel courageous," she wept, burying her face in her hands. "I feel like a coward. I left a note. I ran out a side door and into the woods behind the church. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay." He was silent for a long moment. Alara feared she had said too much, that she had burdened this kind stranger with the ugly, complicated truth of her life. But when he spoke again, his words weren't filled with judgment or pity. They were filled with understanding. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run," he said softly, "especially when you're running to save yourself." His simple validation was a balm on her raw, frayed nerves. He didn't question her. He didn't doubt her. He believed her. In that moment, Alara Vance, the runaway bride, the socialite in disgrace, felt seen. Not as an acquisition, not as a headline, but as a person who had made a desperate, brave choice. And in the quiet safety of this stranger's home, she finally allowed herself to grieve for the life she had almost lost to that golden cage. Alara had expected to leave the next morning. She had assumed she would wake up, thank Marcus for his kindness, and call the one friend she thought she could trust to wire her some money and help her disappear. But when morning came, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gray, the thought of leaving the small, quiet house felt like stepping back into the storm. The world outside was Julian's world. It was a place of power, influence, and eyes everywhere. Here, within these four walls, was the only place she had felt safe in months. Alara's life, once a whirlwind of scheduled appointments, social obligations, and strategic appearances, slowed to the gentle, rhythmic pace of Marcus and Lily's world. She awoke not to the demanding buzz of a PDA, but to the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of the house coming to life. She swapped borrowed sweatpants for a pair of jeans Marcus's sister had left behind, clothes that were comfortable and unassuming, clothes that allowed her to move and breathe. She insisted on helping, needing to feel useful, to repay their kindness in the only way she knew how. At first, she was clumsy, out of her element. She nearly flooded the kitchen washing dishes, her experience limited to loading a top-of-the-line dishwasher. But Marcus was endlessly patient. He showed her how to properly deadhead the wilting roses in the small garden beds out front, his large, calloused hands gentle on the stems. One afternoon, seeking refuge from her own spinning thoughts, she wandered into the garage, which Marcus had converted into a woodworking shop. The air was thick with the rich, clean scent of pine and cedar. Tools hung in neat, orderly rows on the walls, and half-finished projects stood like patient sentinels in the dusty light. Marcus was there, planing a long piece of oak, the muscles in his back and arms moving with a fluid, practiced grace. "What are you making?" she asked, her voice quiet. He looked up, a smile touching his eyes. "A new headboard for Lily's bed. She wants one with stars carved into it." He ran his hand over the smooth, pale wood. "I like making things that last. Things that have a purpose." He handed her a small block of scrap wood and a piece of sandpaper. "Here, try this." Alara sat on a stool, the rough paper in one hand, the wood in the other. She began to sand back and forth, back and forth. The repetitive motion was meditative. The friction was real, tangible. She was smoothing away the roughness, creating something clean and new from a discarded piece. As the wood grew warmer and smoother under her fingers, she felt a corresponding quiet settle over her own turbulent spirit. For hours, they worked in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the scrape of sandpaper and the rhythmic shush of the plane. She was not Alara Vance, corporate strategist and socialite. She was just a woman, sanding a piece of wood, in a quiet workshop, next to a good man. Her connection with Lily deepened just as slowly and naturally. The little girl, who had at first been a silent observer, began to include Alara in her world. One day, she took Alara by the hand and led her to the backyard, to a patch of earth that was overgrown with weeds and tangled vines. "This was Mommy's garden?" Lily whispered, the first full sentence she had ever directed at Alara. "It's sleeping." Alara's heart ached. She looked at the neglected plot, a forgotten square of potential choked by neglect. Felt symbolic of her own life. "Maybe," Alara said softly, kneeling down beside the little girl, "we could wake it up." And so they began. They spent their afternoons in the dirt, their hands side by side. Alara, who had once managed multimillion-dollar revitalization projects, now learned the simple, profound satisfaction of pulling a stubborn weed and clearing a space for something new to grow. Lily, in turn, began to chatter, telling Alara stories about the flowers her mother used to plant, the cheerful faces of the pansies, the proud stance of the sunflowers. They were not just pulling weeds. They were tending to a memory, coaxing it back to life. One afternoon, as they were clearing a particularly stubborn patch of thistle, Lily looked up at Alara, her face smudged with dirt. "Are you sad because you lost your sparkly dress?" she asked, with the unfiltered honesty of a child. Alara paused, a weed in her hand. "No, sweetie," she said, and the truth of it resonated deep in her soul. "I'm not sad about the dress. I think I was sad because I was lost. And now I'm starting to feel a little bit found." Lily seemed to consider this with great seriousness. She then patted the freshly cleared soil. "Good," she said decisively, "because the sunshine daisies need a new home." That evening, as they ate dinner, a simple pasta dish Alara had learned to make, she felt a genuine smile on her face, easy and unforced. She was sharing a meal with two people who asked for nothing from her but her presence. In this small house, doing the simple work, she was not acquiring value, she was creating it. And for the first time, she understood the difference. The quiet routine of sanding wood, pulling weeds, and sharing meals was slowly, methodically, repairing the broken parts of her heart. The days bled into a peaceful rhythm, a gentle current that was carrying Alara further and further from the rocky shores of her past. The serenity, however, was a fragile bubble, and she knew it. The world outside Marcus's quiet haven hadn't stopped turning. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Alara sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. Marcus came out and sat beside her, the old chains groaning softly as he set the swing into a slow, rhythmic motion. The air was warm and smelled of honeysuckle. "Lily talks about you all the time," he said, his voice a low rumble in the twilight. "She hasn't been this animated, this happy, since Sarah passed." The mention of his late wife hung in the air, not as a shadow, but as a gentle presence. Alara had pieced together parts of the story from photographs on the mantelpiece and Lily's innocent mentions of Mommy, but Marcus himself had never spoken of her directly. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," Alara said softly, not wanting to intrude on his grief. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening woods beyond the yard. "It's been 3 years," he began, his voice thick with memory. "It was a car accident. Fast. The doctor said she didn't suffer." He took a deep, steadying breath. "Sarah was... She was like those sunflowers Lily talks about, bright and warm. She saw the best in everyone. She was the one with the big dreams for my woodworking. She wanted me to open a real gallery, to have a showroom in the city. She believed in me more than I believed in myself." He fell silent again, and Alara could feel the weight of his unspoken words. "When she was gone," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "everything just stopped. The world went gray. And Lily, she just retreated into herself. She stopped talking for almost 6 months. All that mattered was making sure she felt safe, making sure she knew I wasn't going anywhere. So the gallery, the big dreams, I packed them away. My only job was to be her dad, to be steady. That's all." He turned to look at her, his eyes dark and earnest in the fading light. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand. This life, this little house, it might seem small, but it's everything to me. It's what I built from the wreckage." Tears welled in Alara's eyes. His sacrifice, his quiet, unwavering devotion to his daughter, was the most profound act of love she had ever witnessed. Julian built monuments to himself. Marcus had built a sanctuary for his child. The contrast was a chasm, deep and absolute. "It's not small, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the biggest thing in the world." Their shared vulnerability hung between them, a fragile, beautiful thread connecting their two very different histories of loss and survival. But just as this new, deeper intimacy began to settle, the outside world finally broke through their bubble. Later that night, unable to sleep, Alara found herself scrolling through the news on her phone for the first time in over a week. Her stomach plummeted. Her face was everywhere. Socialite heiress Alara Vance missing. Feared kidnapped. The headlines were sensational, dramatic. And there, in every article, was a photograph of Julian Croft, his face a perfect mask of heartbroken concern. He was giving a press conference from the steps of their shared penthouse, pleading for her safe return. "Alara, my love, if you can hear me, please just come home," he said to the cameras, his voice catching with practiced emotion. "I'm lost without you. We can work through anything. I'll give you anything." The performance was flawless. He looked like the perfect, grieving fiancé. But Alara saw the truth in his cold, calculating eyes. This wasn't a plea. It was a threat. He wasn't asking her to come back. He was hunting her. He had turned her disappearance into a public spectacle, ensuring that every person in the country was now looking for her. He was tightening the net, making it impossible for her to remain invisible. The peace she had found in Marcus's home suddenly felt terrifyingly precarious. The wreckage of her old life was a tidal wave, and it was about to come crashing down on this safe and quiet shore. The sleek black town car was an alien presence on the gravel driveway, its polished surface reflecting the simple, rustic house in a distorted, mocking way. It seemed to suck the very color from the landscape. Alara was in the garden with Lily, their hands deep in the rich soil, when it pulled up. Her blood ran cold. She knew, with a sickening certainty, who was inside. "Lily, sweetie," she said, her voice remarkably calm. "Why don't you go inside and show your dad the new tomato plant we found?" Lily, sensing the sudden tension, nodded and scurried toward the house. Alara stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans, her body a rigid line of defiance as the passenger door opened. Julian Croft stepped out. He was impeccable, as always, in a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. Not a single hair was out of place. He looked around at the modest surroundings with a faint, dismissive curl of his lip before his eyes landed on her. "Alara," he said, his voice smooth as silk but with an undercurrent of steel. "You've caused quite a scene. I have to admit, this rustic phase is a new look for you. It's quaint." "What are you doing here, Julian?" she asked, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I've come to take you home, of course," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He took a step closer, his expensive cologne polluting the clean country air. "This little adventure is over. You've had your fun, made your point. Now it's time to stop embarrassing me and come back where you belong." Just then, the screen door of the house creaked open and Marcus stepped out onto the porch. He didn't say a word, simply stood there, his presence a solid, unmovable wall at her back. Julian's eyes flickered to Marcus, a flicker of contempt in his gaze. He sized him up in an instant. The worn jeans, the simple house, the manual labor etched into his hands. He dismissed him completely. "I see you've made a friend," Julian said, his tone dripping with condescension. He turned his attention back to Alara. "Pack your things. We'll be gone in 5 minutes." "I'm not going with you," Alara said, her voice shaking but firm. Julian's smile didn't waver, but his eyes grew colder. "Don't be childish, Alara. This isn't a negotiation." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook and an expensive fountain pen. He walked towards Marcus, who hadn't moved a muscle. "Let's expedite this, shall we? Name your price," he said to Marcus, clicking the pen. "For your trouble. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. Every man has a price." The insult was so profound, so dismissive of everything Marcus was, that Alara felt a surge of protective fury. But Marcus simply looked Julian in the eye, his expression calm and unreadable. "She's not for sale," Marcus said, his voice low and even. "And neither am I." For the first time, a crack appeared in Julian's polished facade. Annoyance flashed in his eyes. He had expected compliance, greed. This quiet, unshakable dignity was something his money couldn't touch, and it infuriated him. He snapped the checkbook shut. "Fine," he hissed, turning his venom on Alara. "Have it your way, but understand this. You can stay in this hovel. You can play house with this carpenter. But I will not be made a fool of." His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "I have friends in family court. I know all about Mr. Thorne's past. A single father, a modest income, a tragic history. It would be a shame if someone were to suggest he was an unfit parent, bringing a volatile, unstable runaway into his daughter's life. A custody battle can be so draining, financially and emotionally. The threat landed with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't about her anymore. He was threatening to destroy Marcus, to take Lily away from him. He was using the best, most decent thing in this man's life as a weapon. Alara looked at Marcus and saw the flash of pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for his child. Julian had found his weakness. He had found their weakness, and now he was squeezing hard. The silence that followed Julian's departure was heavier and more suffocating than any of his words. The sleek black car disappeared down the road, but a toxic residue lingered in the air, poisoning the peace they had so carefully cultivated. Alara stood frozen in the garden, the warmth of the sun on her skin doing nothing to chase away the icy dread coiling in her gut. She had brought this. She had led this monster to their door. She watched Marcus, who had turned and was staring at the house, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid. He was looking at the window where he knew Lily was watching, and the protective terror of a parent was etched on his face. He had built this life for his daughter, a fortress of love and stability against the grief that had threatened to swallow them. And she, in her desperate flight, had handed Julian the battering ram to tear it all down. That night, the house was silent in a new way. It was not the comfortable, peaceful quiet of before, but a strained, tense silence, filled with unspoken fears. They went through the motions of dinner, but the food tasted like cardboard. Lily, with a child's unerring instinct, sensed the shift. She was quiet and watchful, her usual bright chatter extinguished. Later, after Lily was in bed, Alara found herself in the small room she'd been using, mechanically folding the few items of clothing she had borrowed. She placed them in a neat pile on the bed. Leaving was the only answer. Disappearing from their lives was the only way to protect them. If she was gone, Julian would have no more leverage. His fight was with her, not them. She could run again, run further this time, draw his fire away from this place of goodness. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Marcus was standing in the doorway, his face etched with exhaustion. He saw the neatly folded clothes on the bed, and a look of profound sadness crossed his features. "You can't," he said, his voice rough. "You can't let him make you run again. He'll destroy you, Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You heard him. He'll go after Lily. I can't let that happen. I won't let my chaos ruin your life." "Our life," he corrected her gently, stepping into the room. He walked over to her, his presence filling the small space. "For the last 2 weeks, it's been our life, don't you see? His power comes from making people feel alone. He isolates, he threatens, he makes you believe you're the only one who will suffer. That's how he wins." He reached out and took her hands, his grip warm and steady. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who built things, who fixed what was broken. "I was terrified this afternoon," he admitted, his gaze meeting hers, raw and honest. "The thought of anyone hurting Lily. It's the only thing in this world that can break me. And for a minute I thought about telling you to go. I thought about giving him what he wanted to make him leave us alone." He took a deep breath. "But then I thought about what that would teach my daughter. To back down in the face of a bully? To let fear make our decisions? To turn our back on someone who needs us? Sarah, she would never have stood for that. And neither will I." He squeezed her hands. "You are not chaos, Alara. You are the woman who taught my daughter how to plant daisies. You are the woman who sits in my workshop and patiently sands wood until it's perfect. You are not a problem. You are a part of this home. And we do not abandon family." Tears streamed down Alara's face, but they were not tears of fear or despair. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and a fierce, burgeoning hope. All her life, she had been taught to cut her losses, to mitigate risk, to protect her assets. Marcus was teaching her to stand her ground, to protect her people, to fight for what mattered. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice small but laced with a new, unfamiliar resolve. "We don't run," he said, his voice firm, a promise in his eyes. "We don't hide. We face him. Together." In that moment, the crisis that was meant to tear them apart had instead forged them into something stronger. Alara was no longer running from something. She was standing with someone. And she realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she was finally ready to fight back. The message came the next day via a crisp, impersonal email from Julian's legal team. He was requesting a meeting. Not a confrontation, but a mediation. He proposed a neutral location, a small upscale cafe in the nearest town. To discuss the terms of Alara's peaceful return, it was a classic Julian maneuver, creating the illusion of civility and control, forcing the confrontation onto his terms, in a semi-public space where a scene would be unseemly. Alara read the email, her heart pounding, but the fear was different now. It was mixed with a cold, hard anger. He thinks he can manage this like a hostile takeover, she said to Marcus, who was reading over her shoulder. Then we'll treat it like one, Marcus replied, his voice steady. What's your move, Ms. Vance? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. For the first time, she wasn't thinking like a victim. She was thinking like the top-tier corporate strategist she had once been. My move, she said, her eyes gleaming with a long dormant fire, is to accept his meeting. But we do it my way. She spent the next few hours on the phone, her voice crisp and authoritative, a stark contrast to the hesitant woman who had arrived on their doorstep 2 weeks ago. She made calls to her personal lawyer, the one man Julian didn't own, and to her private wealth manager. She was liquidating assets, creating paper trails, and preparing her defenses. She was transforming from a pawn into a queen. When she and Marcus walked into the cafe the next afternoon, the air was thick with tension. Julian was already there, seated at a corner table with a severe-looking man in a dark suit. His lawyer. Julian looked relaxed, confident, a predator assured of his victory. He stood as they approached, a magnanimous smile on his face. Alara, I'm so glad you came to your senses, he began. Let's skip the pleasantries, Julian, Alara said, her voice cool and even. She and Marcus sat opposite them. You wanted a mediation. Let's mediate. Julian's lawyer slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table. Mr. Croft has been extraordinarily generous, the lawyer said in a dry monotone. In this agreement, he is willing to overlook this unfortunate episode. Upon your return, he will also establish a rather substantial educational trust for Mr. Thorne's daughter. A gesture of goodwill. It was the threat, wrapped in the language of philanthropy. A bribe and a gag order all in one. Alara opened the folder but didn't read it. She simply stared at the top page, at the dense block of legalese designed to chain her back to him. Then she looked up, her gaze locking with Julian's. No, she said. Julian's smile tightened. Don't be difficult, Alara. This is the best offer you're going to get. It's not an offer, it's a threat, she countered, her voice ringing with clarity. And I'm not signing it. In fact, I have a counteroffer. She slid a much thinner folder across the table, one she had prepared herself. This is a sworn affidavit detailing your threats against Mr. Thorne and his daughter, which, as my lawyer will confirm, constitutes coercion and emotional distress. This is also a copy of the restraining order I will be filing against you this afternoon. Julian's lawyer opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages, his professional composure faltering slightly. Julian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will bury you in legal fees. I'll drag this man's name through the mud. You have nothing. That's where you're wrong, Alara said, leaning forward. And here was the truth, the final piece of herself she had kept hidden. You always saw me as an accessory, Julian, an asset. You never bothered to look at my portfolio. Before I met you, I managed my own inheritance from my grandmother. It's not your level of wealth, but it's considerable. And for the past 2 weeks, it has been sitting in an irrevocable trust. My lawyer has already established a legal defense fund for Marcus, should he need one. You see, I learned from my father's mistakes. I will never be vulnerable again. She stood up, her movement fluid and certain. Marcus stood with her, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of her back. She looked down at the man who had almost owned her, and she felt nothing but a distant pity. He was the one in the cage, a prison of his own making, built from power and greed. My life is not a company for you to acquire, Julian, she said, her voice clear and strong, turning the heads of the few other patrons in the cafe. And my heart is not a line item on your balance sheet. Consider this our final negotiation. The deal is off. Permanently. She didn't wait for a response. She took Marcus's hand, their fingers lacing together. A perfect, seamless fit. Together, they turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Julian Croft sitting amidst the ruins of his carefully constructed power, stunned into a silence he so rarely experienced. They walked out into the bright afternoon sun, not as a runaway and a rescuer, but as partners. They were free. The drive back to the house was quiet, but it was a quiet born of peace, not tension. The weight that had been pressing down on them for days had finally lifted, leaving a clean, light-filled space in its wake. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, the little blue house looked more like a sanctuary than ever before. It was not just a shelter from a storm. It was the harbor they had fought for and won. Lily came running out to meet them, her face alight with a child's pure, uncomplicated joy. She threw her arms around Marcus's legs, then turned and gave Alara a fierce, unprompted hug. Alara knelt and hugged her back, burying her face in the little girl's hair, inhaling the scent of sunshine and childhood. This was real. This was what she had been fighting for. That evening, after Lily was asleep, they sat on the porch swing again. The air was cool and crisp, and the sky was a blanket of brilliant, glittering stars. The chains of the swing made a soft, rhythmic creak, a soothing soundtrack to the new chapter of their lives. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The battle was over. The victory settled deep in their bones. Alara rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the solid, steady strength of him. He was her anchor, the man who hadn't tried to save her, but had stood beside her so she could save herself. "I thought I was running from him," she said softly into the darkness, the words she had been holding in her heart finally ready to be spoken. "And I was, but I think I was also running to something. I just didn't know it yet." She lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes shining in the faint starlight. "I think I was running to you, and to Lily." Marcus turned his head, his gaze gentle and full of a quiet, profound emotion that made her heart ache with its beauty. "I think," he said, his voice a low, warm whisper, "we were just waiting for you to get here." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away, but she didn't. She met him halfway. His lips were soft, gentle, a stark contrast to the hard, possessive kisses she had once mistaken for passion. This kiss was not a taking. It was a sharing. It was not about ownership, but about belonging. It was a kiss of gratitude, of relief, of a future just beginning. It was quiet and deep and held the promise of 1,000 more sunsets on this porch. When they finally broke apart, they looked out at the yard, at the small patch of garden they had been tending. A few days prior, they had planted the sunshine daisies Lily had so carefully chosen. Even in the dark, Alara could imagine them, their roots taking hold in the rich, dark soil, ready to turn their faces to the morning sun. She laced her fingers through Marcus's again, her hand fitting perfectly in his. The broken road that had led her here, terrified and in tatters, had not been an ending. It had been a detour, a painful but necessary path that had guided her away from a life of gilded emptiness and delivered her to the doorstep of a true and lasting home. 1 year later, the afternoon sun streamed down, warm and golden, on the little blue house. It was the same house, but fuller, brighter. A brand new porch, wide and welcoming, wrapped around the front. Marcus had built it with his own 2 hands, from cedar that smelled like hope. On the porch, a collection of mismatched pots overflowed with vibrant flowers, scarlet geraniums, purple petunias, and a cascade of white alyssum. The garden in the backyard was almost unrecognizable. The once neglected patch of earth was now a riot of life and color. Rows of plump, red tomatoes grew heavy on the vine, next to leafy green lettuce and towering sunflowers that stood like proud, happy sentinels. And in the center of it all was a sprawling, cheerful patch of sunshine daisies, their yellow faces turned up to the sky. A joyful shriek of laughter erupted from the lawn. Lily, now a year older, her braids flying behind her, chased a monarch butterfly across the grass. Her silence and anxiety were a distant memory, replaced by the boundless energy and chattering curiosity of a happy, secure child. Alara watched from the porch swing, a gentle smile on her face. She was wearing simple jeans and a soft t-shirt, her feet bare. The frantic, high-strung energy that had once propelled her through boardrooms and charity galas was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding calm. She hadn't returned to the cutthroat corporate world. Instead, she had used her formidable business skills to help Marcus. She'd built a website for his custom furniture business, Thorne and Company, handling the marketing and logistics while he focused on his craft. Orders were now coming in from all over the country, from people who appreciated the integrity and artistry in his work. His dream, once packed away, was now thriving. But that wasn't all. 2 days a week, Alara volunteered at a women's shelter in town, using her strategic mind to help them secure grants and funding. She was helping other women find their own roads out, offering them the kind of support she herself had so desperately needed. Marcus came out of the house, carrying 2 tall glasses of iced tea. He handed one to Alara and sat down beside her, his arm draping naturally around her shoulders. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice the same calm, reassuring rumble it had been on that first rainy night. "Everything," she said, leaning into his embrace, "is perfect." They sat together, watching Lily finally give up on the butterfly and instead turn her attention to picking a bouquet of daisies. They were a family, forged not by contracts or obligations, but by a chance encounter on a dark road. They were a testament to the fact that sometimes, losing everything you think you want is the only way to find everything you actually need. Alara looked from the thriving garden, to the beautiful home, to the loving man beside her, and the happy child in the yard. This was true wealth. It wasn't something you could acquire or possess. It was something you had to nurture. It was something that grew, slowly and patiently, in the rich soil of kindness, trust, and unconditional love. The broken road had been a blessing, a painful, beautiful gift that had led her, against all odds, exactly where she was always meant to be, home.